Welcome to the Pioneer Podcast. This is Adam Strutz. Now, I'm recording this from Washington, D.C., and this would be the first special episode of this podcast. And when I say special episode, I mean an episode that is outside of our natural rhythm, our weekly rhythm. It's an extra episode that we are squeezing in between two others. And this is because something very big happened just a few days ago as you are listening to this. And I've had the opportunity to go into what has happened and to get some expertise some expert analysis to help you understand what has happened and to get some views on this. And of course, I'm referring to the attempt to assassinate former President Donald Trump. But before I get to that, I want to do a little housekeeping and just go over a few quick points with regard to this podcast, and then we'll jump right into the interview I had with Colonel Chris Wyatt. So firstly, this is a new podcast. This is still one of the first episodes that you are listening to, but we are treating it as if it is already a major podcast. And so we have some very big guests lined up for this podcast and some very big topics lined up. And I'm putting a lot of effort into the podcast, also in terms of the monologues that will be part of this podcast in the future. But I would encourage you to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't done so yet, and to share it on social media with your friends and families and so forth, so that we can get the numbers up and running, because this podcast is going to be an important part, perhaps even one of the foundational building blocks of our communication strategy going forward. So we want to get the numbers up as soon as we can. And then the second point is we've had some questions about the Afrikaner Foundation. And so I have discussed this in an earlier episode, but I'm going to give you the quick elevator pitch as to what this is. The Afrikaner Foundation is a new institution that forms part of the Solidarity Movement in South Africa. Now, the Solidarity Movement is a network of more than 50 institutions aimed at ensuring a future for the Afrikaner community in the southern tip of Africa. And this includes institutions such as Solidarity, the Union, AfriForum, the Civil Rights Group, Solidarity Helping Hand, you could say, welfare organization, Academia, the Institution of Higher Learning, the School Support Center, Marula Media, and so forth. As I said, there are more than 50. And so the Afrikaner Foundation is a new institution with a particular focus. And the focus is to garner international support for the work that we are doing. And in this sense, we talk about outcomes and incomes. So when we say international support, we don't mean publicity abroad. That would be part of it, but that is not the goal. The goal is much more than that. Our ambitions are much higher than that. We are talking about outcomes, and when we say outcomes, we mean tangible things. We mean things that actually change as a result of our activity. So outcomes includes cooperation agreements, in other words, institutions outside of South Africa working on a more formal or a more full-time or a more comprehensive basis with the institutions that we currently have. And it includes policy influence. And then as far as income is based, an important part of what we do is fundraising. Now, we are very proud to say that virtually everything we've done to date in South Africa within our institutions has been achieved with local funding and crowdfunding, not really corporate funding. It's members of our community making small donations every month to build a university and to build all these institutions that we've been involved with. But we are accelerating what we need to do, as I mentioned in the last episode, and therefore we need to accelerate our activities abroad as well. So fundraising is an important part of what we are doing, and I will be talking about this in the future. And I would encourage you to support the Afrikaner Foundation. So step one, or phase one of the Afrikaner Foundation, is to be financially self-sufficient. Our plan is not to build a big institution. It must be small and flexible, but it must stand on its own legs, its own two legs in terms of what we are doing. And for that, obviously, we need funding from abroad. So to buy a cappuccino in America is around $5, just over $5. And so if we can get enough people who are willing to spend the amount that they would spend to buy 2 cappuccinos or 2 lattes to make a small contribution to the Afrikaner Foundation on a monthly basis, if we can get enough people to do that, then we would be able to accelerate our successes and to accelerate the activities that we are involved with. And so to do that, you can go onto our website, afrikaner.org, O-R-G, and you can just go to afrikaner.org/support. And you can either sign up as a member, which implies making a monthly contribution, or you can make a donation to a bigger amount, or you can sign up as a recruiter to help recruit people for the organization, for which we would be willing to pay you. We're not using call centers, and typically call centers cost money, but we are willing to help fund people or compensate people who are willing to recruit on a more full-time basis. The third housekeeping point I want to get to is that the Afrikaner Foundation wasn't a week old when we have been targeted by our first hit piece, a quite an extensive opinion piece was written in which we were quite aggressively attacked in Business Day in South Africa by none other than Chris Wyatt. A lot of you, at least if you're in South Africa, you would have heard of him. And so I'm not going to go into the details of this piece. There's one part that I'm especially concerned of is this journalist or so-called journalist or columnist went as far as attributing things to the institution and putting them into quotation marks, telling his readers that this is what we say on the website when he has literally just made something up. And so the opinion piece is very sarcastic and it's very antagonistic towards what we are doing and the fact that we're doing fundraising, the fact that copper is one of our colors, claiming that it's actually orange, white, and blue, which is the colors of the old apartheid government and all of that. So it's this typical hit piece that wouldn't be new to you as the listener. And then he goes on to say what our brand statement is. And then he literally makes something up, which is very sarcastic, very deliberately insulting to the institution. And he puts it in quotation marks as if that is our position on the website. So we will be approaching Business Day, asking them to publish an apology and to retract that. And we'll probably respond and we'll keep you posted on that. But there's just one small section that I want to mention, because this is something that is very striking, and it's just evident of why what we are doing is so important. And this just, again, shows just the complete lack of understanding, or I would go further, the shallowness of many of our mainstream commentators today. So Chris Wyatt takes aim at the fact that we say we are Westerners and we want to preserve Western tradition. And I'm going to read to you just, is it 2 or 3 sentences? He says, "And what is this Western tradition among Afrikaners and Westerners in South Africa that they are seeking to preserve? Or rather, what is it defined in opposition to? Some sort of Eastern tradition, perhaps African tradition, whatever that might be. Is it a euphemism for white, maybe? So the fact that we regard ourselves as Westerners, by definition, according to this guy, means that we are in opposition to probably Eastern tradition or African tradition. So if you're a Westerner, that means, and if you want to preserve Western tradition, that means that you are trying to oppress someone, or you are in opposition to someone. And that just goes to just how shallow our mainstream media has become. If you know anything about Western tradition, you would know that it's a tradition that is founded in the 3 cities, Rome, Athens, and Jerusalem, with its philosophical tradition in Athens, its, you might say, political and legal tradition in Rome, and religious tradition in Jerusalem. And the core of Western tradition is not trying to dominate others, even though the West have tried that. The core of Western tradition is a respect for tradition and a respect for the existence of a variety of communities and preserving that. It's about preservation, not about domination. So we'll respond to that and I will share that with you here. All right, let's get to this topic. Now, yesterday, as I'm recording this, the day before recording this, I was in my hotel room in Washington, D.C. I've just done laundry and I was busy ironing my clothes in my room when I think it was Saturday. So it was 2 days ago. It's now Monday as I'm recording this. When I got the breaking news announcement that there was a shooting at a Trump rally, I immediately switched on the television and it was everywhere. And it was just, the reporting was just starting. It was between 6 and 7 at night here in America or Eastern time. So it was past midnight, I believe, in South Africa. People in South Africa only heard the news as they woke up. And people were still trying to figure out what happened. Now, I'm not going to explain what happened because, as I mentioned, you probably already know, but I did meet up with Colonel Chris Wyatt, who's a friend of ours, who's also active and outspoken on social media, on Sunday, which was yesterday for us. And I asked him for some comments as a security consultant and as someone who has spent 36 years in the U.S. Army. And so we had a very interesting conversation about what happened there and how do we make sense of the actual events on that day. We saw Chris yesterday at the U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis, where he took us through a quick tour, and we were very happy to visit the Naval Academy and to see what's happening there in action. And so we were able to make a quick stop on the campus of the Naval Academy and to talk about this event. So we are on site. You will hear some slight noises in the background, and at one stage you will even hear new recruits parading or jogging past us. We decided to keep that in the interview because it just goes to where we were when we were recording this. So Chris Wyatt is a retired colonel, 36 years service in the U.S. Army. He's a combat veteran. He's a published author. He's a university professor, a national security consultant, an intelligence professional, and a rugby enthusiast. And he's on YouTube at Colonel Chris Wyatt. That's Colonel written out. Chris Wyatt, that's W-Y-A-T-T, or at Real Chris Wyatt. And he's on most social media networks as WMW Chris. So let's get to the response by Chris Wyatt and his analysis of what happened on that day and how do we make sense of that. Colonel Chris Wyatt, thank you very much. We are at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, and we are talking about the major event that happened yesterday here in America with the attempted assassination on the life of former President Donald Trump. And perhaps we should start with you introducing yourself and your own background. You are Colonel Chris Wyatt. We're at the Naval Academy, but you were in the Army, not the Navy. But just perhaps introduce yourself just to get the conversation up and running.
Well, I'm sorry there, Ernst. You started and you said the big event yesterday, and I was still, nursing my wounds over the Springbok defense collapsing, giving up 2 drop goals in the last couple minutes of the game. So, but yes, we're obviously talking about the attempted assassination of President Donald John Trump in Butler County, Pennsylvania, located about 3 hours west of where I live. That's a location where in 2020, 50,000 people rocked up for his rally in that county in 2020. Unheard of. Never seen 50,000 people show up at an outdoor event like that for a presidential or any political candidate. It's amazing. But yes, as you mentioned, I'm Colonel Chris Wyatt, retired U.S. Army, 36 and a half years in the Army. I was in the Signal Corps as an enlisted soldier, started as a private, became a non-commissioned officer, then spent the next 30 years as a commissioned officer, going from second lieutenant through full colonel. And I was an intelligence officer. As an intelligence officer, I worked tactical intelligence, strategic intelligence. I was a counterintelligence agent, signals intelligence. Some of my big assignments included the National Security Agency, where I was chief of staff of a $3 billion acquisition program with a global workforce. I served multiple combat tours in the Middle East, in the Balkans, in Europe, also in Africa. My assignments in Africa as a foreign area officer for sub-Saharan Africa included Tunisia, Liberia, Botswana, Malawi, Niger, Mauritania, Uganda, and Ethiopia, where I worked at the African Union for the current ambassador to South Africa, Reuben Brigady. He was my ambassador when I was in Ethiopia at the African Union. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me. And as far as yesterday's events, as a counterintelligence agent, as a security, should I say expert? I don't know. Subject matter expert, I suppose that's a good term. People will accuse you of boasting when you claim such titles. But I did spend a bulk of my career doing security and intelligence analysis and work. I'm just apoplectic at the abysmal failure of the Secret Service yesterday. This is unconscionable. It's either the biggest cock-up, the worst negligence in the history of the Secret Service, or there's something else at work here. Not trying to start conspiracy theories, but you couldn't possibly have set a scenario that was more screwed up and incompetent than what we saw yesterday. How does a shooter get from here to that building behind you, Aaron? It's right there. That building is about 120 meters away, and that's about what the distance was, with a rifle on a roof that's white in broad daylight during the daytime when Secret Service is guarding the former president of the United States. This is unacceptable. And not that, but watching the video and analyzing the video of the actual shooting that took place, it took 3.5 to 4 seconds before the first Secret Service agent was visibly on top of the president. That's unacceptable. By contrast, when President Reagan, they attempted to assassinate him, John Hinckley, back in the early 1980s in D.C., the Secret Service agent took a bullet for the president and was in front of Reagan in a little over a second, by contrast. So, I mean, there's some serious questions to be asked here. The conspiracy, we have here midshipmen over here marching right now. You can hear them. We are at the Naval Academy. Nice little ambiance back there for the conversation. But this is a time when the midshipmen begin showing up, the freshmen, the plebes, as we call them at the West Point. I forget what they call them here, but it's the Naval Academy. It's the Navy, so I don't pay attention. Yeah. But they show up in the summertime and start going through their sort of hazing-like environment as they start their career as midshipmen at the Naval Academy. When it's over after 4 years, they go on active duty, most of them. If not all of them, they wind up at most of the Navy, some of the Marine Corps, and they can't actually go into other services, but most go in the Navy and Marine Corps. So here come a whole bunch of them rushing down here right now in their fatigue.
That's a great sight. And it's funny being from South Africa and seeing all these...
Well, they're fit. Look at that. No body fat.
They're actually running.
They're all 18, 19 years old, a couple 17-year-olds in there with permission.
Yeah.
Yeah. These
are new recruits, probably.
That's right. Every one of these folks will likely graduate from the Naval Academy in 4 years. The graduation rate's quite high because the standards are unbelievably high just to get into here. Notice they're not walking from place to place despite the brutal heat and humidity here.
They each have a water bottle.
They each have a water bottle because they're expected to run everywhere you go. And only one of them might be slightly a little chubby that I saw. The rest of that 100-plus were quite fit. Anyway, so we digress away from that situation. So in my view, this was the biggest cock-up in Secret Service history, living memory.
Okay, just before we go on to some of the details.
Sure.
So for someone who doesn't live in America, who doesn't understand the security system, so there was secret police or Secret Service, and then there was local police. Who was there, and who's responsible for what at an event like this?
Sure. Ultimately, the organization responsible for the president's security and their family members and other members of the government, senior members of the government, is the Secret Service. Now, that's a branch of the federal government. And they are also known for folks who are involved. They work for the Department of Treasury. They're involved in the tracing counterfeit money, that sort of thing. That's part of what they do. So their job is more than just protecting dignitaries, but that's what they're best known for. Of course, people might remember the movie In the Line of Duty. I think it was called, with Clint Eastwood back in the 1990s. He played a past-it Secret Service agent who took a bullet for the president. Yeah. But, so the Secret Service has security, and they're responsible for coordinating with local law enforcement. In this case...
Can I just ask, Trump has Secret Service because he's a former president.
That's correct. He has a detail.
Not because he's a candidate.
Now, he should have it as a candidate as well. It's unheard of, unprecedented for a presidential candidate not to have a Secret Service detail. In fact, Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy does not have a Secret Service detail right now. This is criminally negligent by the federal government and the Biden regime. They have put his life at risk. This is unacceptable. And after this attempted assassination of Donald Trump yesterday, there will be a lot of scrutiny over the Biden regime's failure to provide. Now, I say the Biden regime because the Department of Treasury works for Joe Biden. Yep. That cabinet position works for him. And these people are negligent in their task of protecting dignitaries, senior people. So Kennedy should have a detail, and so should Trump. When Biden ran for president, Trump's Secret Service provided a detail for him. So Secret Service they're responsible ultimately for the site, everything. But they relent and leave security outside a certain perimeter because they only have so much manpower to local law enforcement. Each state has different levels of law enforcement. Usually have something known as the state police. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, or state, but it's called a Commonwealth, we have state police. The Pennsylvania State Police, or PSP. Those Pennsylvania State Police are best known to people get pulled over for speeding tickets as state troopers. That's how we usually see them. And so most people don't have good interactions with the Pennsylvania State Police or most state police. So what happens is they're responsible, their special operations units are responsible for securing the site outside where the Secret Service has their people at, and they coordinate directly with them. And then oftentimes local law enforcement, whether it's a county sheriff or local police, if it's a municipality, will also be involved. These are multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency operations, and they're no small task. It takes the best people qualified to do this, the most experienced people who don't flinch under fire and under duress, unlike what we saw in Butler.
Yeah.
Horrific.
So can I just ask, because the people on the roof had on the back of the uniforms, it said police, but those were actually Secret Service.
Those snipers are almost 100% Secret Service.
Yeah, all right. And so then...
But, I mean, police is a general term.
Yeah, of course. That's
also the general public, there's tradecraft and operations and tactics things that you don't want to discuss.
So the fact that it says police doesn't mean they're from the local police department?
No, local police department is not going to have snipers.
Yeah, exactly.
First off. The state police might have snipers, but the local police department is not going to have snipers.
And so you mentioned the building. It seemed pretty odd, because in some of the videos you can see they were zoomed out a bit, and it seemed pretty strange that there was such an obvious line of sight. And there's one video that's gone viral on Twitter or X of a guy who said that he actually saw the guy climb up onto the roof, and he was telling people to look. It seems very concerning that it was so easy, assuming that it was easy, or at least that it was possible for someone to just climb up onto a roof like that and lie there for presumably several minutes. So what happened there? It seems to me, or what I could gather, is that they saw him, but they decided not to shoot. Or what's the story? What's your view on that?
Well, we don't know. We need more information. But what I can tell you categorically is that a witness stepped forward and spoke to the BBC reporter on the ground who was there. And it was telecast on BBC. I watched the interview, and this is a red-haired, ginger-haired sort of fellow, so he stands out. But he said pretty much what you said. But he said for 2 or 3 minutes. But, of course, in the crucible of events and tension like that, it is possible for people to accelerate the time frame in their mind. So we don't know how long it was. What I do know is I did subsequently see a video that somebody was recording before the shots rang out. And a gentleman was in the crowd, and he was saying, he's got a gun on the roof. He's got a gun. He's got a gun. You can hear Trump talking in the background when he says he's got a gun. And then someone walked towards the building where the shooter was. And the guy said, don't go over there. He's on the roof with a gun.
Yeah.
And then the shots rang out.
So at what stage do you shoot? Let's say, or the Secret Service, at what? Because you can't just fire at someone or take someone out if you see him on the roof. Do you shoot when you see the gun? Or do you shoot when they
Well, it depends on what the rules of engagement are, but normally in a situation like this, one would expect the rules of engagement to be you shoot first and ask questions later. And the reason I say that is in an operation like this, the sniper team should know where every other sniper is located. If they have to move at some point, they should be in communication to know that, because otherwise you could shoot a sniper. You should know where the law enforcement is. They should be clearly identified. That's why people have things like police on their vest when they're up there doing that. So this is a very strange situation. The building is about, as I pointed out, from here to there, and in broad daylight, no obscurity whatsoever. The gentleman crawls up on the roof, crawls around with a rifle for a few minutes, at least, according to eyewitnesses. And the eyewitnesses claim that they told the police, and the police were puzzled and didn't do anything. And honestly, I have no doubt that that's a true statement. Now, we need to see more witness testimony investigation. Hopefully it's not a January 6th nonsense with the FBI involved again. But we watched the footage of the Secret Service agents who finally collapse on top of the president, and then those who come subsequently. And then when they try to get him into the vehicle, it's like watching the Keystone Cops. One of the female agents couldn't even holster her weapon. There were 3 female agents around the vehicle. They looked puzzled, confused, and this isn't a gender thing. This is clearly agents who are not trained with muscle memory to respond to violent action. Snipers do not recoil when a gunshot goes off. I saw a video with a sniper on a roof behind Trump. No shots fired. Trump's talking. The moment the shot fires, the sniper recoils and pulls back, and his weapon goes up in the air. That's not what a sniper does. That only happens if the sniper's been shot in the head by a bullet or disabled. But he wasn't. He got back up, replaced the rifle, and fired it. That indicates to me someone that has not had sufficient training. They don't have this experience. And the same with these agents who were puzzled, confused. They look scared and nervous, like frightened children trying to get the president into a vehicle.
Yeah.
You compare that with what happened with Reagan. The agents had him in a vehicle and gone in seconds.
Yeah, and to see. So I want to ask you about that. I cannot comment on what they are supposed to be doing and what is good response and bad response. But I've seen a lot of people express concern about exactly what you are saying now. And this links up to what we see sometimes in the news, this what you call DEI, is the diversity and equity.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is really a lack of diversity, inequality, and exclusion.
Yeah, so we get all these memes of LGBT activists in the military and people with purple hair and all these trans and whatever. How is this really a thing? Is this really a problem in the military? Because at least we just saw soldiers running past you, but they didn't look to me like they were.
No, and that won't be tolerated here at this stage. As far as whether it's a problem, it depends on your perspective. Does it exist in the U.S. military today? Indeed, it does. We've seen a born male with male genitalia, Air Force lieutenant colonel, dressed in female uniform, wearing earrings, giving press conferences, saying that he now believes he's a woman, which may very well be the case. Perhaps the person is a woman. But this is very confusing to the airman who yesterday called him sir and will be disciplined tomorrow for not calling him man without him having gone through any hormone replacement therapy or a subsequent assignment. This is undermining the morale and welfare of the military. It takes a cohorted team to be successful in deterring malfeasant actors and in combat. And when you have distractions like this, it's not healthy. A lot of officers at the field grade officer rank are leaving the U.S. military, particularly in the Army, and the Army can't retain them because they're tired of being told they have to put their pronouns into an email. I mean, I'm giving you one example, but it's much worse than that. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. So this is science denial.
So I'm not going to ask you if you think there's a difference between men and women because I know what your answer is. So I'm going to ask you the follow-up question, which is, why do you think in a place like the military, with your experience, why is this an important distinction? And is there a place for women in the military?
Of course.
How do you see genders, men and women in the military? Is it just the same thing, or how should it be dealt with?
No, there's a difference. I served 36 and a half years in the Army, 23 overseas, multiple combat tours. Women have a place in uniform. Absolutely. We couldn't accomplish our intelligence mission, our signals mission, and many other missions effectively without women serving those roles. That has been extended to combat fighters. Apache pilots are now women. Combat aircraft pilots in the Navy and Air Force and Marine Corps are now women. And I'm not a person who has a problem or objections to that situation remotely. But here's the thing. What's going on today is undermining morale and welfare of the military, and it's not helpful. And I'm not talking about women entering fields where they haven't previously been. I'm talking about people confusing the English language and playing games with genders and with pronouns and things like that, and people who clearly have concerns or issues that should be addressed in a private fashion, not people running around and masquerading different ways. This is not going to be received well, and that's fine, because this is not a laboratory. And this is a problem with the U.S. military today. And your question, which you didn't get to, but I think you're going to get to, let me just try to preempt it, is so why is this happening? This is happening because our entire society has been invaded, infiltrated by people on the far political left, not leftists, far political leftists, who have an agenda. Their agenda is the hatred of America, a false narrative, all these lies. They run around and they perpetrate things of attaching them to the right that aren't even from the right. This replacement theory, the people that talk about replacement theory are leftists, not conservatives. Almost no conservatives talk about it. There's some people on the far right that talk about it, but most of the smoke comes from leftists. It's the same thing at all these issues. Most conservatives that I know are empathetic to people who are genuinely transgender, which is less than 0.1% of the population. These are people that deserve our empathy and our care and our love. And Christians in particular, but also Muslims, not so much Muslims, but people of faith, they tend to have empathy for people like this. But this is being pushed in people's faces as this is how society is supposed to be, and most people or a lot of people are like this. And that's simply a falsehood, and that's what's going on. So it's really a challenge for the military to stay focused on its mission. But the left has invaded academia. They've controlled our universities for 40 years. I saw this in the 1980s as an undergraduate, but it hadn't affected my academic performance, and I could see the tide turning in the late 1980s when I had a graduate student who was my professor for a survey course, and he said, listen, I'm on the political left. I'm going to tell you that right now in this class of 130 students, but my views will not influence your experience here. He was honest. And when we'd have conversations after class about an issue, it was pretty obvious it was politically left. We talked, debate, but it never affected, I do research, I write my papers, and my grades were fine. That changed, and the university is now co-opted, and if people don't toe the line with the leftist narrative, which lies about the history of colonization, lies about the history of chattel slavery, lies about the history of America, the greatest nation in the history of mankind, and it's gone from universities, it's now into our high schools and even our primary schools, where we have sick, twisted individuals who 30 years ago would have been put in prison for sexualizing children, who are introducing sexual terms to 5-year-olds. Terms that I never even heard of until as an adult. Then I was kind of a bit embarrassed and ashamed. I learned of these terms at some point. These are not things that 5-year-olds should learn in primary school. 5-year-olds in primary school should be learning not to steal their neighbor's milk, to play nice with others, and their ABCs. That's what they should be learning, not sexual orientation.
So what you're saying is the problems that the U.S. military has and security services is a result of this culture war and
yes.
The attempt to destroy the concept of America for what it was for centuries.
It's a concept to destroy, sorry to interrupt you, it's a concept to destroy Western civilization as we know it.
Here we go, yeah. And replace it with something new.
Oh, but not even replace it, just to let it all fall apart.
Yeah.
They're not even offering an alternative. It's not like people are saying, you know what, your Christian Western civilization is unacceptable. We want to go with Navajo culture. They're not even offering that.
Yeah.
They're just tearing down everything that's good and sacred. And here's the example here, too. Look, I don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak, when it comes to Confederate statues. But as a historian, I'm heart sore that people would tear down statues. There's a statue of Stalin in New York City. Did you know that? Joseph Stalin has a statue in a park in New York City. And you know what? I don't care.
Well, as an Afrikaner, that resonates with me in the sense that we had the Rhodes Must Fall campaign. And the Afrikaners are not big fans of Rhodes due to an obvious history with the concentration camps and British expansionism. But we didn't rejoice when we saw them vandalizing the roads.
That's stupid.
There's a place for the statue.
Exactly.
This is something, it's very concerning. So maybe just to...
Hey, why don't we tear down the statues of Shaka? He was such a nice guy.
Yeah.
Not.
So just to end this off, so getting back to what happened, there's a lot of questions still, and we don't know all the details, and there's investigations going on. How long will this take? When will we find out what happened? I have another question, but how do you see this going forward?
I think we'll get the answer the second week of November, after the election.
After the election. All right, I see. And then the other thing is I know a lot of people have been talking about this. So in South Africa, we had a very famous political assassination, which is the assassination of Hendrik Verwoerd in, was it 66?
Yeah.
And... but that was actually the second attempt. There was an attempt to assassinate him at Loskopdam a few years prior to that, and he was shot in the face and he survived and he had a scar as a result of that. And then there was another attempt. And at the time people said that it was just some crazy guy who tried to kill him. Don't be too concerned about this. Now, this is not to say that it's going to happen, that there's going to be another attempt, but certainly this is something that people should be concerned about. If there's one assassination attempt, history has shown that oftentimes that leads to another attempt. What are your views on that?
Well, my views on that are that I was talking to Kristen from Biz News earlier the day. She asked me about this, and I said, quite frankly, I'm not shocked that this occurred. The political climate, the temperature of the political discussion has been off the charts inappropriate for years. Since Donald Trump came down that escalator, whether you like him or dislike him, if you're an honest observer of what's happening, he has been attacked over and over again on a personal level with no justification whatsoever. The guy is called a racist. There's no evidence of him being a racist. A lot of his friends were black people. He did low-income housing for poor people, especially blacks and Hispanics. He hired more women and Hispanics in his companies than on average percentage than anyone in any part of the industry. It's just, so they've been attacking him left and right. It's utter nonsense. Trump is the victim of their ire because the system is being pushed back against by the center and the conservative right in this country who've had enough of this garbage woke in America. And so Trump is at the forefront of that. He's the face of that, and that's why they attack him personally. They know, for instance, many of them despise people in uniform, people who are devoted to the Constitution, not to their lunatic ideas.
And to law and order.
And they despise us. But they don't dare attack us because of the reputation of the military. And that's, we didn't get to, but that's one reason for this woke garbage going in the military. It's to undermine the cohesiveness of the military and the effectiveness of the military so that we become a less effective, less cohesive organization, and we become subject to scrutiny and ridicule and complaint from society, and the reputation that has been hard-earned by our military over the past 4 decades for its excellence and one of the best institutions in the world is being eroded. That's the whole purpose of it. And that's why they attack Trump, to undermine the conservative movement. But here's the bottom line. I'm a conservative politically. I'm not a far-right wackadoodle. I'm conservative, right of center. I was here before Trump, and God willing, I'll be here after Trump. Whether Trump is here or not, we are here.
Yes.
And you cannot ignore over half the country who believe in traditional values. What they do is they try to paint people as things they're not. Because you believe in traditional values means you're a homophobe. No, I have no issues with people who are homosexual. That's a personal issue. That's none of my business. I don't want to know about that. That's your issue, not yours. But you get my point. But what's going on is these things are being pushed in people's face. We have an entire month devoted to pride. Why is that? What's that all about? There's no month devoted to heterosexuality.
Yeah.
None. I mean, what makes it so special?
Yeah.
It's just who you are. Quit looking for special attention. If you're not being discriminated against, which isn't the case, then what's the issue? Anyway, I mean, I'm not against people being proud of who they are. My point is that special treatment is unwarranted.
Yeah, well, it does seem that South Africa has a lot of troubles, but when it comes to this ideological battle, it does seem that in many ways America is ahead.
Well, you started it, brother. Fees must fall started in South Africa. Then, tuition forgiveness and loan forgiveness came here. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Systemic racism argument started in South Africa. Then it came here. Thank you for that.
Chris Wyatt, thank you very much.
My pleasure.